مساء الخير وأهلا بكم إلى هذه الحلقة الجديدة من واشنطن أونلاين. ما هي نوعية الاتفاقات التي تم إبرامها بين أنقرة وكل من فنلندا والسويد؟ وما هي مواقف الولايات المتحدة والدول الأوروبية من مثل هذه الاتفاقيات؟ وهل على سكان الشمال السوري القلق من هذه التفاهمات بين تركيا والغرب؟ وكيف تتحرك المنظمات الأمريكية هنا في واشنطن وسط استمرار التهديدات التركية للشمال السوري؟ هذا ما نبحثه في حلقة اليوم من واشنطن أونلاين مع ضيفي لهذه الحلقة السيد ريتشارد غزال، وهو الرئيس التنفيذي لمنظمة الدفاع عن المسيحيين. ابقوا معنا لمتابعة الحلقة. أهلا وسهلا بك سيد ريتشارد، وشكرا لوقتك ووجودك معنا اليوم في استوديو واشنطن أونلاين. سيد ريتشارد، هناك الكثير من المتغيرات اليوم التي تبدو بعيدة عن الشمال السوري ولكنها في الواقع قريبة وتقلق سكان الشمال السوري. هناك تفاهمات ومحادثات بدأت بين أنقرة وفنلندا والسويد لتسهيل عملية انضمام فنلندا والسويد إلى حلف الناتو. المطالب التركية مقابل تمرير مثل هذه الخطوة متعلقة بحزب العمال الكردستاني، والتي تربطه أنقرة بشكل مباشر بقوات سوريا الديمقراطية والمنظومة الحاكمة في الشمال السوري. هل برأيك على سكان الشمال السوري فعلا القلق من صفقة محتملة بين الغرب وأنقرة؟
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. I certainly think it's a big concern for those in northeast Syria, specifically given Turkey's now agreement to allow Finland and Sweden into NATO. For a number of weeks, they've been holding up the process, holding NATO hostage over Finland and Sweden over this issue of PKK. The curious part about it, however, is for years, for decades, both Finland and Sweden have considered the PKK a terrorist organization in their words. However, this isn't enough for Turkey simply because they have cooperated with the PYD as well as the YPG in northeast Syria. We know that the KRG and the PYD have been firm supporters of the Western alliance, the United States alliance against ISIS and other forms of terrorism. This is against the interest of Turkey, of course. Turkey, since 2016, has been supporting terrorism in many forms in northern Syria, and they now look to expand their range of control into northeast Syria. So this is huge cause for concern because, as of right now, it seems as though it's not a matter of if Erdogan will go into northeast Syria. It almost looks as a matter of when he can have the opportunity to do so. So it's a huge cause for concern for the West as well.
الولايات المتحدة على الأقل علنية تتظاهر وكأنها بعيدة عن هذا المشهد، وأن هذه المحادثات هي بين أنقرة وفنلندا والسويد، وأنه لا يوجد صفقة ستعقد بين واشنطن وأنقرة حول الشمال السوري أو حول الكرد بشكل عام. ما هو الموقف الأمريكي من كل هذا؟ هل تعتقد أن أمريكا ستقدم تنازلات أيضا لأردوغان ليسهل عملية انضمام فنلندا والسويد إلى حلف الناتو؟
Well, I certainly hope so. The recent talks in Madrid, where Turkey has agreed to allow Finland and Sweden into NATO, were a good thing on its face when you look at it on the surface. However, if this signals to us that, or if worse yet, if it signals to Turkey and to Ankara that United States foreign policy is for sale, this is a problem. Since 2 days ago, when Turkey agreed to allow these two European nations into NATO, the United States has ramped up its rhetoric and outward signaling that they are more open to agree to continue the sale of F-16s to Turkey. So this is just 2 days later after a simple agreement at the negotiation table in Madrid. So what's to come? We can only imagine what's to come, and Turkey is certainly sitting in Ankara, also themselves making foreshadowing of what is to come. If this is a signal that the United States policy will also acquiesce to further involvement in northeast Syria, this could embolden Erdogan. Let's make no mistake about it. Erdogan did not do a good thing by allowing these two European countries, Sweden and Finland, into NATO. He simply stopped from doing a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference between doing a good thing in foreign policy and stopping from doing a bad thing. And if we reward Erdogan from stopping this nefarious action, that's bad signaling.
ولكن أيضا أردوغان بتسهيله هذه الخطوة، خطوة انضمام فنلندا والسويد إلى حلف الناتو، هو يغضب موسكو، والعلاقة بين أنقرة وموسكو ظلت منسجمة رغم الحرب في أوكرانيا ورغم أن تركيا عضو في حلف الناتو. ما هو المردود الذي سيناله الرئيس أردوغان ليغضب روسيا وهو بحاجة لروسيا اللاعب القوي والهام في الأراضي السورية؟
The relationship between Moscow and Ankara is a very interesting thing. We have this term in English called, we say frenemies. They're half friends, they're half enemies. And that's exactly the description between Russia and Turkey. Right now, the Middle East is starving. Economically, in many countries, they're hit hard. But also in terms of food supply, the Russian war in Ukraine is causing shortages in food and so forth. Russia is a huge trade partner with Turkey. In terms of foreign policy, they're at odds on many things, but they've continued trade at an all-time high. They're selling weapons, let's not forget, the S-400 to Turkey. So they're a huge partner. There's financial interest there as well as security interest and so forth. So while I think this move to allow these two European countries into NATO, Finland and Sweden, angers Moscow for sure, I think they're playing the long game. They're looking at the bigger picture. Russia and certainly Putin has never been the type to think too hard about short-term losses or short-term wins. He looks at the full game, and I think that's where his head is. Of course, they need to gesture outwardly that they're upset by this move because, it's a psychological operation, of course, on the part of Russia. But in the long term, I don't think it's going to change that relationship as much as some may think.
في العلن وما ينقل من محادثات مدريد هو أن المطلب التركي من فنلندا والسويد هو تسليم عدد من المطلوبين لتركيا من حزب العمال الكردستاني المتواجدين في هذه الدول. هل برأيك هذه هي المطالب أم أن هناك ما وراءها؟ وهل هناك مطالب متعلقة بالشمال السوري برأيك؟
We have to understand one thing. When Erdogan says the word PKK, he means more than PKK. He doesn't mean just the organization. He means the Kurdish people in general. Mm-hmm. When he's criminalizing the PKK and calling them terrorists, he's calling the Kurdish people, he's calling PYD, YPG, all PKK. So he won't stop just at PKK. He's going to roll this into his greater mission to go into northeast Syria, no doubt. So this is just another foreign policy tool for him to play with definitions, play with words, talk about terrorism and PKK, all the while set on his goal to expand his sphere of influence into northern Syria. He's talking about anti-terrorism operations, a 30-kilometer buffer zone across the northern border of Syria. If we look at the history since 2006, each operation, most recently 2019, we see that each area that he has invaded, in fact, itself has turned into a hotbed, a breeding ground for terrorism. Sharia law has taken hold in all of these areas, and he hopes to expand that by using this idea of terrorism and leveraging it over Europe and NATO.
ذكرت في بداية هذا اللقاء بأنك ترى بأن العملية التي يهدد بها أردوغان يعني أصبحت محتملة إلى حد كبير وممكن أن تحدث في أي وقت. ما هي المؤشرات على أن هذه العملية ستحدث بالفعل؟ وهل تركيا قادرة عسكريا واقتصاديا وأيضا سياسيا بنظر إلى الداخل التركي بشن هذا الهجوم الجديد؟
That's a great question. I think one thing is for sure. When Erdogan says something, he doesn't lie. I think we know this from history. In terms of foreign policy, he'll play games. But when he says, I am going into, let's say, northern Syria or eastern Mediterranean or, let's say, the Caucasus in Artsakh in Armenia, it happens. He is coming up on an election year. His polls are way down. His economy is way down. And oftentimes you can distract from domestic policy disasters with foreign policy conflicts. And this is what he aims to do. This is one of the things he aims to do in a renewed invasion into Syria. Can he do it militarily? I think he could. It depends on a number of things. His perceived, what he perceives to be the support that the YPG would receive from the West, from the United States particularly. And also it's a matter of time, like I said. He's going to do it in such a way where he would have political cover when there's something else happening. Of course, we see the Russian war in Ukraine to be a huge opportunity for him, as it has been. It's been a distraction. It's also give him some more gravitas in the area as well. So I do think he can afford it politically. In fact, I think it would benefit him potentially domestically. So I do think it's a matter of time.
بالنظر إلى طبيعة المناطق وموقع المناطق التي يهدد الرئيس أردوغان بغزوها اليوم، وهي منبج وتل رفعت في الشمال السوري، وهي مناطق فيها سيطرة عسكرية روسية، هل تعتقد أن أردوغان ينتظر ضوء أخضر روسي أم ضوء أخضر غربي؟ هل من عراقيل متعلقة بهذه الدول ينتظر أردوغان أن يتخطاها ليقوم بمثل هذه العملية؟
Well, I certainly think his focus this time will be more along the eastern border between Syria and Turkey. In 2019, the invasion Operation Peace Spring, consisted of an invasion that extended up until roughly the area of Ras al-Ain in northern Syria. And this time it looks as though he hopes to complete that 30-kilometer buffer zone all the way to the border with Iraq, which would include towns such as Christian towns, such as Qamishli and places Maliki all the way on the border with Iraq, and other such locales with historical Christian populations, Kurdish Arab populations as well. The reason for this is because, as we said, since 2019, when the United States brokered a ceasefire with Turkey, the attacks have not stopped. In the last 2+ years, there have been over 2,000 violations of the ceasefire in that area alone, and as well as closer to the Khabur region, Tel Tamar, and other parts of northeast Syria. He hopes to complete the operation this time around by getting the complete border with Syria, which includes the northeast.
وهذا طبعا يحيلنا إلى التساؤل حول موقف الإدارة الأمريكية، موقف الكونغرس الأمريكي، منظمتكم ومنظمات أخرى تحاول الدفاع عن المنطقة ضد هذه التهديدات التركية. ما هو موقف واشنطن من مثل هذه التهديدات؟ لأنه إذا حضرتك ذكرت يعني مدن مثل القامشلي ومثل عمودة ومثل هذه المناطق في شرق الفرات، هذه أيضا مناطق فيها تعداد سكاني كبير، هي مدن مأهولة بعدد كبير من السكان، فيها أيضا نازحين من مناطق أخرى في سوريا، ليس فقط مناطق احتلتها تركيا ولكن أيضا مناطق يعني خاضعة لسيطرة النظام السوري اليوم. ما هو موقف واشنطن من هذه التهديدات؟
Well, Washington thus far, at least Congress I can say, has signaled very positively from my perspective to this threat. Just last week, House and Senate leadership, Foreign Affairs committees, put forth a strong statement, Senator Menendez and Risch, as well as House leadership, telling Turkey that this is something that we're not going to stand for. There will be no renewed invasion into northeast Syria. The White House has also, as well as the State Department, has also come out and publicly said we won't stand for this. There will not be another invasion. My fear, however, is in the wake of the Madrid Agreement to allow Finland and Sweden into NATO, and then the response by the White House softening up, and even the Congress softening up on the sale of U.S. F-16s to Turkey. This signaled that their word is not gold standard as far as Turkey is concerned. If they can appease them in one area, what's to say they wouldn't do it in another area? So this is the real threat and the real concern that I have.
هل تملك الإدارة الذاتية مجلس سوريا الديمقراطية اليوم ما يكفي من الأدوات للفت أنظار واشنطن بكل مؤسساتها التنفيذية والتشريعية إلى خطورة هذه التهديدات التركية التي نتحدث عنها، خاصة أن كل الاهتمام والتركيز اليوم منصب في واشنطن على الحرب في أوكرانيا؟
Well, the good thing about it here in Washington, D.C., lawmakers, policymakers are very well aware about the autonomous administration and all the positive developments happening there, particularly with regard to the pro-democracy form of government, bringing all ethnicities, all religions, genders to the table. And it's a really unique, successful experiment in that part of the world. So DC is very much aware of this. So that's one very positive saving grace that could play a big role. In terms of the capability in D.C. for SDF and for the AANES, the Autonomous Administration, to play a role, we have worked hand in hand, my organization in defense of Christians, with representatives from the AANES, Christians, Kurds, and otherwise. And there has been positive response. The challenge there is not convincing people and advocating for people about the merits of the autonomous administration. It's a matter of building the political will and the foreign policy will to stand up to Turkey. Unfortunately, Turkey has had a strong hold on the United States for a number of decades, since 1952, specifically when they became a NATO ally. And it's a very tough grip to break, particularly in the State Department. Congress is very well aware of the threats that Turkey pose. Congress, of course, members of Congress have a little more autonomy with how they speak, whereas the State Department, it's a heavy institution, and it's very tough to change minds.
سيد ريتشارد، كان من اللافت أنه في ظل إدارة الرئيس دونالد ترامب، رغم أنه قام بانسحاب جزئي أدى إلى غزو تركي للمنطقة، تمكنت منظمتكم، منظمة دفاع عن المسيحيين ومنظمات مسيحية أخرى تابعة سواء لللوبي اليوناني أو منظمات أخرى في واشنطن، من التأثير على قرار دونالد ترامب اللاحق بإبقاء بعض القوات في الشمال السوري، عدم تنفيذ الانسحاب الكلي، عبر يعني إقناع المجموعات المسيحية الإنجيلية الأمريكية المقربة من دونالد ترامب والتي تهم الرئيس دونالد ترامب. يعني نائب الرئيس دونالد ترامب كان مايك بنس الذي ينتمي إلى هذه الجماعات المسيحية التي يهمها التنوع الديني، وأنتم نجحتم في إيصال الصورة الحقيقية للشمال السوري، للشمال الشرقي السوري ومناطق الإدارة الذاتية بأنها مناطق متنوعة، وأنه من الخطر الشديد تركها للجماعات المدعومة تركيا. هل هذه الرسالة ممكن أن تخترق اليوم إدارة ديمقراطية مثل إدارة جو بايدن؟ هل يهم إدارة جو بايدن أنه يوجد مسيحيين ويوجد كرد ويوجد يزيديين ويوجد مجموعات عرقية متنوعة تتعرض لخطر حقيقي إذا ما اجتاحت جماعات متطرفة مدعومة تركيا الشمال السوري؟
Well, one thing is for sure, the Trump administration was not perfect, but there were many good things about the Trump administration, one of the best of which were his foreign policy. Aside from his strong record with foreign policy, he made human rights for ethnic and religious minorities around the world a priority of his administration, and he was not bashful or shy to make this clear. I think the Democrats are also interested, of course, in the question of human rights and ethnic and religious liberty. However, one difference we see is that President Trump's administration was more bold and was less concerned with what other members of the international community thought of his foreign policy. So he was willing to step on toes sometimes in order to be effective, and he certainly was effective for all his thorns that he may or may not have had. Also, another factor, I think, is the fact that Trump's domestic policy really was so beneficial to the United States. The economy was doing great. Unemployment was at an all-time low in many sectors of the United States population. Domestic policy was good, so he had that leverage, that latitude to focus on foreign policy. The Biden administration, it pains me to say, is a disaster thus far in terms of its domestic policy. And when your domestic policy is in shambles, you have very little political capital to focus on foreign policy, and certainly to focus on it in a bold, effective kind of way as the Trump policy, as the Trump administration demonstrated.
هل تعتقد أن العدد القليل المتبقي من المسيحيين وغالبيتهم من السوريان في الشمال الشرقي لسوريا اليوم مهدد مع هذه الموجة الجديدة من التهديدات التركية؟ وهل هناك ما يمكن فعله اليوم في ظل انشغال إدارة جو بايدن مثل ما ذكرت بالشؤون الداخلية التي ربما تشوش الإدارة ولا تدعها قادرة على التحرك بمرونة كبيرة في الخارج؟
Yeah, the Christian community in northeast Syria has been there for thousands of years, and it's threatened, as you know. The Christians in northeast Syria, the Syriac Christians, and when I say Syriac, I mean Assyrian, Chaldean, as well as Syriac, many of them are there after fleeing genocide in Turkey. in 1915, and many of whom also came from Iraq in 1933 and settled in the Khabur Valley as well. So these are multi-generational survivors of genocide, and this is yet another episode of this history of genocide and being sent from one place to another. They are threatened. They have taken a very significant role in the autonomous administration, as well as the defense, in the form of the Syriac Military Council, which is a huge supporter of the SDF in northeast Syria. Onto the question as to whether or not this could be an existential threat to the Christians, it certainly can be. If this threat becomes a reality and Turkey does invade the remainder of the northern border into the northeast, this could be disastrous. As I mentioned earlier, in the parts of northern Syria that Turkey has previously invaded, it's become a hotbed for terrorism. It's become ruled and governed by Sharia law. And the Christians of northeast Syria, be it in Qamishli or Qabarbid or Malikiya, Ras Al Ain, can't afford to live under this sort of, call it an administration, won by radical Islam. Right now, they're in a place of stability, comfort, democracy, and this is an existential threat. This is like none they've ever witnessed before in their history.
شكرا ريتشارد تودي.
No, madam, thank you.
والشكر لكل متابعي واشنطن أونلاين ونورث بريس. ألقاكم في حلقة جديدة الأسبوع المقبل. إلى اللقاء.